The Big Ten playoffs, or the Big Ten is trying to possibly change the playoffs in a number of ways. So we got news from, I believe it was Pete Thamel that reported it first, that the Big Ten, Tony Petitti, are in discussions. Nothing super big yet, but apparently there is a thought out there with them about a 24 or 28 team playoff, and how this would accomplish a lot of the things that fans want to happen. Now, obviously, as soon as this got put out there on Twitter, social media, TikTok, wherever it might be, anywhere where the socials are active, people saw 24-28, and they had a very similar reaction to when Eli Drinkowitz said a 30-team playoff. Too many teams. We don't like this. You know, you're ruining the game. You're ruining the regular season. I mean, I tweeted out there, I'm of the opinion the game's already been ruined. You know, I mean, the game is unrecognizable from what it was nearly 30 years ago. But I get people still want to try to hold on to what's there. I think it's a little foolish to try and wish that we go back and try to keep what was once there. However, I get it. You know, people don't want to let go of the past. But Zach, I'm kind of curious. What do you think of this potential college football playoff format from Tony Petitti and the Big Ten?
So I understand it. And if I'm gathering correctly, it's both about access and kind of security for all the conferences. Like that seems to be the heart behind it, right?
Yes, yeah. Big Ten, access to it and everything else. Yeah.
And I think I saw someone in the chat 7755 that would be kind of
that's Philip. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, and I understand the heart of it, and like nobody's been more vocal about playoff expansion than I have been over the past like 20 years. I mean, when I say most vocal, not that I have the biggest following, but like I am very much in favor of let's get more teams in the playoff. Let's give more access. I do think though, like I understand what Tony Petitti wants and like how this would guard against the SEC trying to assert their will and their dominance, which I think that's part of this is how can we, in a sense, guard against the SEC pulling a fast one with the at-large bids, with the 5+11 model. I get that. 24 or 28 is too many. I think, and I don't think my thought process is the game's going to be unrecognizable. I don't think that's my thought. I thought that what we did with the 12 teams we had this year was awesome. And I know the quarterfinals were blowouts, but I thought it was awesome because you did have teams that fought to get in and they were rewarded for it. And there were real stakes and there were real consequences, right? Alabama losing to Oklahoma mattered. If we have 24 or 28 teams, that loss doesn't matter, right? And I think I like the world we live in right now, where if you lose once or twice, it doesn't necessarily knock you out. But that if you lose enough, you are knocked out. And I think if you get to 24 or 28, I do start to think that you lose the appeal of what this sport is. And so maybe I am thinking about it from a nostalgic point of view. But I don't know if I understand the benefits of expanding it out that much.
Yeah, so I did want to point out the positives. I pointed out the positives on Twitter, and I didn't do a very good job of it. A lot of people thought I was like vying for this to happen. I'm not vying for this to happen. I've said this before on the show. I am a traditionalist at heart. I would love it if we stuck with like the 4-team playoffs. I'm okay with the 12-team, but really an 8-team playoff probably would have been more of my preference, right? BCS was okay, but with the SEC bias and everything else, you really couldn't have an effective BCS system. So I was glad they expanded it to 4 teams. I think 8 teams probably would have been better than 12, but I was okay with 12. There are positives to this if they did it the right way. And that's the hardest part, is that doing it the right way does not create the most revenue. Yes, I know I'm being Captain Optimistic, but this also just comes from me as like somebody who wants to listen to a podcast. I don't think I want to I don't want to listen to a podcast where people just gripe and complain about something the entire time. Like I do want actual analysis of what this would mean. And that's kind of what I want to give here. So I'm going to give you a few positives. You're going to say they are not positives and they suck, and I get that, but just hear me out. All right. This would technically keep the conference races to be more meaningful, right? You're looking at 7 teams in the Big Ten, 7 teams in the SEC. It's not going to be meaningful for Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, those top tier teams, but it would be meaningful for the Iowas. It would be meaningful for a team like Indiana, who has a much tougher schedule, or a team like USC, Nebraska, right? Washington, teams like that. It would be much more meaningful for those kind of teams, and it would be more meaningful for a team like Michigan, who has a young quarterback. Maybe they could catch their stride at the end of the season and really figure themselves out. It also does create more competitive matchups that actually mean something. Right now, like, I know everybody talks about, well, out of conference games, we got to have those, and they mean something. They don't mean hardly anything right now. They are so early on in the season. You lose them, and people forget about them at the end of it. The last time we saw it actually mean something was when Texas beat Alabama, and people were still vying for Alabama to be over Texas. And what was that, 2023, in that very early game?
Well, it didn't matter because Bama got in.
Oh yeah, it didn't matter. Bama still got in over a 14-0 Florida State, right?
Yeah.
So I guess you could say it mattered that Alabama played that tough game, but I mean, not really. If they didn't play that tough game, they still would have got in because they would have been undefeated. So, I mean, I want to take a look at this from college football Reddit. They put together what a 2018 playoff would have looked like this past year. You have matchups on here that would honestly be pretty fun to watch. And I get it. I know people hate it. That's fine. But just humor me for a second. All right? We would have saw Indiana Louisville. That'd have been a fun game to see, right? We would have saw Arizona State Syracuse. You're telling me you don't want to see Sam Levitt, Kyle McCord, Fran Brown, Kenny Dillingham, 2 up-and-coming young head coaches coming up. You would have saw Colorado and SMU. Shador Sanders, Travis Hunter, Rhett Lashley, and his whole crew there. Like, there are some honestly pretty interesting matchups here that you would have been guaranteed, and it would have been fun to watch. Now, I get it. Again, it's too big, but if you just look at this, there are some actual fun aspects to it here that would actually have players participate in it and not just be a bowl game that players are not playing in because they're trying to prepare for the NFL. To me, that's the worst part of the bowl season right now, is you have matchups that would be fun if they happen in the regular season, but they're not really fun anymore because players aren't actually playing for their team, right? Mm-hmm. Players are sitting out, opting out. Now, the Michigan-Alabama game was fun because players opted out for Michigan and they still won. So that was pretty crazy and fun. But overall, like, that game did not have nearly as much excitement going into it as maybe some other ones. And then finally, honestly, kind of goes along with the competitive matchups, but it's just more games worth paying attention to. I know people say, well, more bowl games, the better. It's more games. Okay, but how many games is too many when they're not actually worth paying attention to? When they're not actually worth paying attention to, it's like, all right, that's cool, but also not really, because it's not any fun to pay attention to them because the game doesn't really matter, number one. And number two, you don't have players on the team playing that are, star players or whatever else. So I get it. Crucify me in the chat. I understand, but I did want to point out some of those possible positives there. Zach, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lieutenant Dream Crusher coming to the rescue. Thank you, Philip, for that. I do think you're right about several things here. And the biggest one I'll point out is that there is this big bowl season problem that we have to figure out. Because right now, most bowl games, your NFL draft eligible players or players that want to transfer are going to leave. And so you get shells of the team that was there into the game. And so like it's just a different experience now, right? Bowl games used to be a reward. It was fun. Like I loved bowl season. But you're right, with the rare exception where Michigan can, their second string defensive line can dominate Alabama's first string offensive line. Good job, Alabama. Way to be a good SEC team.
Because Alabama didn't care to be there, right? Like they didn't show a care and a fight to be there.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe they didn't, but most of their roster was there for that game, so they at least felt obligated to be there.
Yeah, but they were there to take pictures, and they were there. I mean, yeah. Anyway, we don't need to revisit the whole thing, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, I just think that is a problem that this would address. I do think that the concerns I have, one is just I do think the regular season gets impacted. I think the other thing, I think it's either 5 or 6 games that a team would have to play back to back, like to win the national championship. I think the toll, and this is, I think, the concern with the 12-team playoff too. And you saw, Ryan Day talked a lot about it as he was preparing his team for a potential 16 or 17 game season. You would have to change the regular season somehow, which maybe that's what Tony Petitti is angling at, because we know he is targeting the SEC's conference schedule and equalizing schedules. So maybe that's part of his angle is, let me throw out a crazy suggestion that actually forces the SEC to streamline with the rest of us. But I still think I think for the entirety of the sport, I don't know if I love it, but I also don't know what you do with bowl season. And I don't know what you do. I just think if you go that route, you have to change. There are other changes you have to make, particularly scheduling, systematizing non-conference, systematizing conference schedules. Like, I think you'd need a commissioner. Well, it needs a commissioner already, but you would desperately need one if you went to this model.
Yeah, I mean, you need a commissioner incredibly bad right now, because without a commissioner, you're continuing to get stuff like this. Which, let's be honest, we can try to point this in any way that, like, oh, this would be good for this, and here's a positive for this. The Big Ten's not thinking about that at all. And, newsflash to SEC fans out there that are upset with the Big Ten right now, the SEC is not thinking about that either. The Big 12 is not thinking about that. The ACC is not thinking about that. All of these groups are trying to think about what gives us the most money. And right now, there is nobody combating that, trying to fight for what's best for the sport. So, Michael, next question to ask you here, Zach, was how likely do you think this is to happen? It's not if it's going to happen, it's when. Because right now there is nobody fighting for the sport to actually stay what the sport is about and stay for what the sport is meant for. It's just a bunch of conference commissioners and presidents and athletic directors that are trying to get as much money as possible.
Yeah. Which I think we knew when the sport expanded to 12 that it eventually would expand. It's just a matter of time. And there's a part of me that's like, this could be fun. And then there's a part of me that's like, I really don't love it.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the last question here, and then we will end this segment of the episode and bring Jeff in for the second segment about our superlatives and stuff like that. Zach, if this were to happen, if we were to get a 24-28 team playoff, who would be some winners and who would be some losers in the Big Ten? Give me at least one name for each.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned a few. Like, I think your Iowas, your Wisconsins, your Indianas, your Illinois, like those mid-tier teams, especially if they're going to auto bids, right? If we're not talking about what a committee thinks. We're talking about where teams finish in your conference. Then I think the teams that benefit the most are teams that maybe don't have the cachet, the program cachet when you say their name, but they can kind of earn their way in by a conference record.
And earn more respect for their name, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. So I think that they are the winners
Yeah.
because, and we saw it. We've seen it a little bit with Indiana, although I think people are still skeptical about them. But when you start making waves and you make a playoff, all of a sudden you become a more attractive destination. We saw that in the transfer portal. We saw it in recruiting with Indiana. Well, if more and more teams can make the playoff, you become a more viable option for you to both develop and to attract high level talent to win a championship. So I think those schools certainly help. I think obviously the SEC and the Big Ten probably benefit more than the ACC and the Big 12 because I think a model like this, I know it says 7-7-5-5, but again, as certain conferences hold more money, they will probably finagle themselves to get more power, more influence, and more say. So I think the losers ultimately are the middle of the pack ACC and Big 12 teams.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you there. If I'm thinking only Big Ten, my teams are, and Philip said it there, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. Those are the teams because the regular season truly will matter less for those teams, right?
Yeah,
Win
true.
7 Big Ten games just like you do every single year, and you're going to be in the playoffs and have an opportunity to go do something. The season is basically going to become just a warm up for what everything is truly at the end. However, the winners in this situation would be teams like Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Wisconsin. All right, I know Wisconsin's not very good right now, but how many years would Wisconsin have benefited even from a 12-team playoff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2014, 15, 16, those years, or 20, I guess 11, 12, 13, like those kind of years. Wisconsin would have benefited from those because they would have gotten in and had the opportunity to do something. So I think that's really what you look at here more than anything else. You look at the top half of most of these conferences, the SEC, the Big Ten. The regular season won't matter as much for them, but it's these lower down teams that could have the opportunity to make the playoffs and create a name for themselves there that could honestly bring them up even more because then they're not just winning bowl games that are meaningless. They're actually winning games in a playoff that's going to go to their record and they're going to be paid attention nationally and people are going to say, oh, wow, I didn't expect Indiana to beat Louisville or, oh, wow, I didn't expect Iowa to beat Tennessee or something like that,
Yeah.
So